Her phone rang. I didn't mean to look, but the name on the screen stopped my heart. It said, Ed Ellis' husband. That's my husband. The man I buried 7 years ago. The man whose grave I visit every Christmas. Every wedding anniversary. I cried for him. I lit candles for his soul. And yet, here he was calling my daughter-in-law. In that moment, I realized, maybe I didn't just lose my husband that day. Maybe I lost my family, too, and didn't even know it. Either. My name is Margaret Ellis. I'm 67 years old, and for most of my life, I believed in family like people believe in God, quietly, without question, and with all my heart. I live alone now, in a little house with a white porch and too many flower pots. I wasn't always alone. I used to be we, me and Ed. Ed Ellis, my husband, the man I buried 7 years ago after a fire took him from me. The man I thought I'd grow old with, and the only man I ever truly loved. Since his death, Thursday nights have become sacred to me. It's the only evening my son Daniel, his wife Jenna, and my grandson Noah come over for dinner. It's our little family tradition, and I hold on to it like a lifeline. Noah's 6 now, with wild curls and a laugh that reminds me of Ed, when he used to tell jokes at the dinner table and pretend not to burn the meatloaf. Every Thursday morning, I wake up early and make the chili. That's Ed's recipe. Though I've made it spicier over the years, a little kick never hurt anyone. I set the table for 4, light a candle in the middle, and fold the same green napkins we got on our 20th anniversary. I always leave Ed's chair empty. Jenna thinks it's silly. I don't mind. It's not for her. The day everything began, I remember the sky was soft and grey. The kind of day that makes you want to bake something or open old boxes. I made apple crumble after the chili, and I used the cinnamon Ed loved. As I stirred, I caught myself humming one of his old songs. That always happens when I cook. I forget he's gone for a second, and it's like he's coming home again. Just late, as usual. I ironed my blouse and put on some blush. I always try to look nice on Thursdays. Not because I care about appearances, but because I want Noah to remember his grandma looking happy, even if she misses someone. They arrived a little late that evening. Jenna came in first, holding a yoga mat, hair still damp. "Sorry, Margaret," she said with that polite smile. Class ran over. Daniel followed behind, distracted by his phone, giving me a quick peck on the cheek. Noah came running in like a little tornado, straight into my arms. "Grandma! Grandma! I drew a dragon today!" he yelled, already pulling his crayon-filled backpack open. I smiled and crouched down to his level. "Did you? A friendly dragon, I hope?" "Nope," he giggled. "A fire dragon. He eats bad guys." I tousled his hair. "Well, maybe he'll scare away all the grumpy people too." We sat down to dinner, and for a moment, everything felt as it should be. Jenna complimented the chili. Daniel actually laughed at one of Noah's stories, and for a brief slice of time, I felt like I wasn't just an old woman living alone with her memories. I felt like a mother, a grandmother, someone who still belonged. I watched them all while I cleaned up the dishes. Jenna was texting someone, fingers moving fast. She kept smiling at her screen. Daniel didn't seem to notice. He was on his laptop, checking something for work. Noah sat on the floor, colouring a picture of a forest and a man with white hair. I asked him who the man was. "That's the man Mummy sees after yoga," he said without looking up. "He lives in the woods and gives her flowers. He has white hair like Grandpa." I paused. "Like Grandpa?" "Uh-huh," Noah nodded. "But Mummy says not to tell Daddy." My stomach fluttered. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and gave him another cookie. Later that night, I folded laundry while they got ready to leave. That's when it happened, the moment that cracked something inside me. Jenna had left her phone on the kitchen counter. It lit up. I wasn't snooping. I was just standing there. But when I saw the name flash on the screen, I stopped breathing. Ed Ellis, husband. I didn't understand. My first thought was that it was an old contact, or maybe some sick joke. But the word husband wasn't a mistake. Jenna had saved that number like it belonged to someone important, someone present. I didn't pick it up. I couldn't. My hands shook too much. I told myself I was being silly, that it had to be a glitch. Maybe she reused his name for something else. But my heart told me something else entirely. They left a few minutes later. I kissed Noah goodnight and watched them drive off. I stood at the window long after the taillights disappeared, holding Ed's old flannel shirt in my hands like it could answer the questions spinning in my mind. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in Ed's chair at the table, still set for 4. I lit the candle again, even though it had already burned once. And for the first time in years, I whispered into the empty room, "Ed, what have you done?" Because deep down where truth lives even when we bury it, I knew that phone didn't lie, and whatever was coming. It wasn't just about Jenna, it was about everything I thought I knew, and everything I was about to lose. The next morning, I folded Ed's old flannel shirt and put it back in the cedar chest, just like I always did. But my hands hesitated at the lid. The phone call from last night, or whatever it was, still echoed in my head like a loose floorboard creaking in an empty hallway. You try to ignore it at first, but once you hear it, you can't unhear it. I told myself it was a mistake. Maybe Jenna saved some spam number under Ed's name to mess with telemarketers, or maybe it was a contact she copied over by accident. There were 100 ways to explain it away. I tried them all, and yet none of them sat right with me. That Saturday, Daniel dropped Noah off for a few hours while he and Jenna went out for a couple errands. He didn't say more, and I didn't press. I was just happy to have my grandson for the afternoon. We made banana bread, colored dinosaurs, and played Grandma's version of hide and seek, the one where I sit on the couch and count to 30 while he hides in the same spot twice. After we settled on the floor with crayons, I asked casually, "So, what does Mummy do after yoga?" Noah didn't even look up. "She goes to the woods, to the house with the red door." I paused. "A house?" He nodded, still colouring. "The one by the lake, with the swing and the old boat. She goes there after yoga sometimes, but she said not to tell you or Daddy." My heart skipped. "Did she take you there?" "No, just her. She says it's her quiet time place." End quote. I stared at the crayon in my hand. I hadn't coloured in years, but I kept them around for Noah. And now I found myself gripping a red one so tightly it snapped. That night, I lay in bed listening to the wind brush against the porch swing. It creaked every so often, just like it used to when Ed sat out there reading the paper. I almost turned my head, expecting to see his silhouette. I didn't, of course, but the ache returned, soft and stubborn. On Sunday, I baked a second loaf of banana bread and brought it over to Daniel's house. Jenna was in the backyard, watering her plants. She waved at me with that too smooth smile, the kind that doesn't touch the eyes. "Thank you for watching, Noah," she said. "We needed the time." I nodded. "You two have something special planned?" "Just running errands," she said. Too fast. Nothing exciting. I handed her the bread. "Still doing yoga on Thursdays?" "Oh, yes. Keeps me sane." She laughed. Something in me wanted to ask right then, "Who calls you Ed Ellis?" But the words didn't come out. I stood there, silent, with the bread in my hands, while her hose dripped water onto her sandals. Back in my car, I sat in the driveway for a moment longer than usual. My hands were steady, my breathing normal. But inside, something had shifted, like a curtain pulled just a few inches, letting in light I wasn't sure I wanted. The next few days, I kept busy. I visited the church thrift shop, helped organize winter coats, and taught a beginner sewing class at the library. From the outside, I probably looked the same, the smiling older lady who always wore cardigans and gave too many cookies. But inside, I was watching everything differently. On Thursday, they came for dinner again. Jenna was dressed a little too well for yoga makeup done. Hair curled, wearing perfume I hadn't smelt before. Daniel didn't notice. He never does. Or maybe he chose not to. Noah, of course, ran to me with that big grin. "Grandma, I drew the red house. Wanna see?" He pulled out a folded sheet from his backpack. Crayons everywhere. A house by a lake. A tree swing. A small boat. And standing next to it, a stick figure with white hair. I forced a smile. "Who's that?" He leaned in and whispered, "That's Mummy's friend. But it's a secret." I nodded slowly, my heart thick in my chest. "Your secret's safe with me, Isno." During dinner, Jenna got up to take a call. She stepped out onto the porch, lowering her voice, turning away from the window. I watched her from the kitchen sink, drying the same plate twice. Daniel was on his phone again, oblivious. I wanted to shake him and shout, "Do you see it? Do you hear what I hear?" But I didn't. I never have. I've always been the quiet one, the peacekeeper, the one who holds the family together with casseroles and soft words, the one who forgives before the apology. But something about that night broke a little thread inside me. Not enough to scream, not enough to accuse, just enough to know that I wasn't crazy, that the cracks weren't just in my head. They were real, they were spreading, and they were growing deeper every day. There's a kind of silence that doesn't bring peace. It's not like the hush of morning coffee or the stillness of falling snow. It's heavier, the kind of silence that settles in your bones, one that follows you room to room even when the television is on or the kettle's whistling. That was the kind of silence I lived in after that Thursday dinner. I couldn't shake the image of Jenna whispering on my porch, the red house in Noah's drawing, the name Ed Ellis, husband, flashing on her phone. And yet, I said nothing. I kept wiping plates, folding laundry, baking muffins I didn't even feel like eating. I didn't want to believe it. That's the truth. You don't get to 67 without learning how to carry heartache. But this was different. This wasn't grief. This was confusion dressed up as routine. On Monday morning, I sat with my coffee at the kitchen table, looking at an old photo of Ed. He was wearing his flannel shirt, holding a fishing rod, smiling like he didn't have a single regret in the world. I traced the edge of the picture frame, wondering, what did you keep from me, Ed? And why did I never see it coming? I picked up the phone and called the insurance company, the one that handled Ed's life policy back then. I told them I needed a copy of the final paperwork for my records. They said they'd mail it within the week. The next Thursday came faster than I expected. I told myself I'd just observe, nothing more. No jumping to conclusions. No playing detective. But the moment Jenna walked in, I felt it again, that disconnect. She looked at me like I was a neighbor, not her mother-in-law. Her eyes avoided mine. Her smile was polite, careful, distant. Daniel stayed glued to his phone through most of dinner. Noah, sweet as always, asked me if dragons could live in boats. Only if they can paddle, I told him with a wink. After dinner, while I was rinsing dishes, Jenna left her phone on the counter again, just like last time. My heart beat in my ears. I told myself to leave it alone, that I was too old to be peeking into other people's screens. But then it buzzed. A message lit up the screen. Miss you. Same time next week? The contact name, E. Just the letter. Not Ed. Not Edward. Not even a first name. Just E. Like she was trying to hide it. Like she knew someone might be watching. I put the dish towel down. My hands were shaking again, just like last time. I didn't open the phone. I didn't need to. Everything in me already knew. That night, I went up to the attic and opened the cedar chest again. I pulled out a box I hadn't touched in years, the one filled with Ed's things from the fire. His wallet. His watch. Burnt at the edges. Melted slightly on one side. I held it like it might still be warm. Then I looked closer. The watch was stuck at 3:47 p.m. I remembered that time exactly. That was when they told me they found what was left of him. Said it was quick. Said there wasn't much to identify. But his watch helped. Only now, years later, I realized something. The strap was intact. The face barely scratched. It didn't make sense. A fire hot enough to kill a man, but not melt the leather on his wrist. That was the moment something inside me clicked and cracked. The next morning, the insurance envelope arrived. I opened it with hands that felt like someone else's. I scanned through page after page. Then I saw it. Change of beneficiary. The 18th of February 2016. Authorized by Daniel Ellis. Daniel, my son. That date was 6 weeks before Ed died. I dropped the papers. My breath caught in my throat. I sat down, dizzy. Why would Daniel change Ed's beneficiary just weeks before the accident? Why didn't I know about it? Did Ed know? Or did they know something I didn't? I closed my eyes and pressed my palm to my chest. The pain there wasn't sharp, it was dull, deep. Like a bruise you forgot you had until someone pressed too hard. For years, I'd held onto the memory of Ed as my anchor. Even after he died, I lit candles on his birthday, whispered goodnight to his photo, smiled when I saw his handwriting on old recipe cards. Now, that anchor was slipping, and the people I trusted most, they weren't holding onto the rope. I didn't cry. Not yet. Tears are for grief. This wasn't grief. This was something colder. Betrayal, I think. Has its own temperature. It doesn't burn. It chills you slowly, and that night, I wrapped myself in a blanket and sat by the window, watching the shadows dance across the lawn. There were no raised voices, no slammed doors, no confession letters, just silence, and the quiet, private kind of heartbreak that only mothers know, the kind that builds slowly, in between dishes and errands and smiles that aren't real anymore. I didn't tell Daniel. I didn't confront Jenna. Not yet, because now I needed to be sure. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I don't know how long I sat in that chair after reading the insurance papers. At some point, the sun dipped behind the trees, and the house turned dim around me. But I didn't move. I didn't even blink, I think. My eyes just stared straight ahead at the wall, like maybe the paint would peel back and show me something I missed all these years. Daniel's name was right there, in black ink. His signature. My son, the baby I carried, the boy I read bedtime stories to, the man I still made lunch for when he dropped by, had signed off on something that smelled like a secret. And it wasn't just a detail. It wasn't a clerical thing. It was a change of beneficiary on a life insurance policy weeks before his father died. What do you do when the people you raised become strangers? What do you do when love turns into paperwork? That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked from room to room like a ghost in my own house. Every picture frame looked like a lie. Every drawer held some memory of a life I thought was whole. Ed's old boots by the back door, the fishing photo on the mantel. The envelope with his handwriting that said, "For Maggie." When I'm gone, I used to keep it close like a Bible. I didn't dare open it now. I thought about calling someone. But who? My sister passed 5 years ago. My 2 closest friends are in Arizona and Florida. Most days, I don't hear from anyone unless it's Thursday dinner. And even that doesn't feel like mine anymore. The next morning, I drove to the cemetery. I brought flowers. The yellow ones Ed always picked when we walked by the lake, the ones he called sun puddles. I knelt beside the stone and placed them carefully, like it still mattered, like he was still there. His name was carved so neatly. Edward Ellis, 1949, 2016, 7 years of candles, prayers, and birthday notes. 7 years of missing him. 7 years of talking to this stone like it still held his soul. But now, I touched the granite with my fingers, and for the first time, it felt cold. Not just from the weather, cold in the way truth can be, when it stares back at you and doesn't blink. "If you're alive," I whispered, "then you left me. I waited for something. A sign. A bird. A breeze. Anything. But there was only wind. Empty wind. I sat there for hours. People came and went. Someone's grandson played with a toy truck on a nearby grave. A woman cried quietly beside a row of lilies. The world moved on, and I just sat, like time had stopped only for me. When I got home, I didn't turn the lights on. I went straight to the kitchen and opened the fridge. But nothing looked like food. I closed it, opened the pantry, stared at cans, closed that too. I used to find comfort in cooking. Now, I didn't know what the point was. Who was I feeding? Who was I saving? I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I never drank and stared at the chair across from me, Ed's chair, the same chair I left empty every Thursday. It looked different now, not sacred, not sentimental, just foolish. I talked to him every week. I cried at that chair. I toasted birthdays, anniversaries, and snow days, like he could hear me. And if he's alive, then what have I been doing? Worshipping a lie? Later that night, I opened the hallway closet and pulled out the box labeled Daniel, Baby Years. I needed to remember something real, something innocent. I opened it carefully, like it might break in my hands. Inside were hospital bracelets, crayon drawings, a baby sock with a tiny hole, a picture of us at the zoo, me holding Daniel on my hip, both of us laughing at a goat. I touched the edge of the photo, tears finally pushing through. I did everything for you, I whispered. I gave you everything I had. I don't know who I was talking to, Daniel, Ed, God. Maybe just myself. The tears came harder then. Not loud, just long. They soaked into my shirt, into the box, into the years I couldn't get back. I cried for the woman. I used to be the one who believed family meant safety, the one who thought loyalty was returned if you gave it freely, the one who believed love was stronger than betrayal. By the time the tears stopped, the house was silent again. But it wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, a kind of hollow that echoed. Even when you weren't speaking. I didn't open the curtains the next day. I didn't answer the phone when Daniel called. I just sat by the window, behind the sheer fabric, watching the world continue like nothing had changed. But everything had. Because when you find yourself grieving someone who might still be alive, that's not death, that's erasure. And I, Margaret Ellis, was disappearing, piece by piece, in a house I no longer recognized, surrounded by people I could no longer trust, holding memories that might never have been real at all. The morning after, I cried into Daniel's baby photos. I woke up on the couch. My neck ached, my eyes were dry, and the room still smelled faintly of old tears and cinnamon oil from the diffuser I forgot to turn off. It was quiet. Not peaceful, but not heavy either. Just still. I got up slowly, one hand on the armrest to balance my knees. The tea from the night before was still on the table, untouched, cold. I poured it down the sink, turned the faucet off, and stood there for a minute longer than necessary, listening to the silence. Then, something unexpected happened. The doorbell rang. It startled me. No one ever came by without texting first. Not even the postman. I peeked through the front window and saw a woman standing on the porch, holding a paper bag and a plastic container. She had silver hair pulled back in a scarf, glasses perched on her nose, and a cardigan that looked handmade. I opened the door cautiously. "Hi there," she said gently. "I'm June. I live 2 houses down the blue one, with the overgrown hydrangeas." I blinked. "Yes, I know the house." She smiled. "We haven't really talked, but I saw your porch light was on all night, and, well, I just had a feeling." Before I could say anything, she lifted the paper bag. "I made chicken pot pie," she said. "Too much, as always. Thought maybe you'd take half off my hands." I didn't know what to say. I nodded slowly and opened the screen door wider. She stepped in, like she'd done it 100 times before. Not pushy, just comfortable. She placed the bag on the kitchen counter and looked around like she could sense the weight hanging in the walls. "Would you like some tea?" I heard myself ask. She smiled. "Only if you'll have some with me." We sat at the table. She noticed the photo frame still turned face down beside the salt shaker, but didn't ask. She just sipped her tea and said, "My husband left me when I was 61. For a yoga teacher named Carla." I looked up. She chuckled softly. Not bitter, just matter of fact. "Spent 3 years thinking I'd die of shame," she said. Then one morning, I woke up and realized the shame wasn't mine to carry. We sat in silence for a moment. "I lost my husband too," I said quietly, "but maybe not the way I thought." She nodded slowly, her eyes meeting mine. There was no surprise in them, just understanding. June didn't press for details. She didn't offer advice or try to fix anything. She just stayed. She talked about her overgrown garden, the little free library she built last year, her attempts at watercolor painting that looked more like weather maps than flowers. I laughed. It startled me. It felt like something shook loose in my chest. When she left an hour later, she placed her hand gently on my arm. "Next Thursday," she said. "Come over. I make too much soup too. And you seem like someone who appreciates good bread." I nodded. And for the first time in weeks, I meant it. After she left, the house didn't feel quite as hollow. Still quiet, still uncertain, but not empty. That evening, I sat on the porch swing. It creaked softly beneath me, like it used to when Ed would sit out here with his crossword puzzle. The wind was cool, the sun low, and I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders. I looked across the street at the house with the blue hydrangeas. June was out front, trimming a bush with garden scissors that looked far too small for the job. I smiled, and then I cried. Not the way I had in the dark. Not with that silent, shaking grief. This was gentler, warmer, the kind of crying that comes when something starts to thaw. Because in the middle of everything, the betrayal, the silence, the broken trust, someone knocked on my door with a pot pie, and maybe that didn't fix anything. But it reminded me I was still here, still a person, still worth cooking for. The following week, I found myself watching the clock on Wednesday night, counting down to Thursday dinner like it was a performance I didn't audition for but couldn't seem to quit. I thought about not cooking, letting them show up to an empty kitchen, no chili simmering on the stove, no green napkins folded by hand. But old habits die slowly, especially when they've become your armor. Still, I did things differently. I didn't set Ed's place this time. That chair remained tucked in. The plate never left the cupboard. It felt strange at first. Then it felt right. That night, they arrived late again. Jenna came in wearing the same perfume as last week, her cheeks flushed, hair freshly done. Daniel was quiet, distracted. Noah gave me a hug, then ran to the living room to show me a new toy. Halfway through dinner, Jenna stepped outside to take a quick call. She left her phone behind on the side table next to the couch, and this time, I didn't mean to listen, not at first. But when I passed the hallway, I caught just enough. "I told you not to use that number," Jenna hissed in a whisper. "She's not stupid. She knows something's wrong." A pause, then softer. "I miss you too. But we have to be careful. Daniel's completely in the dark." My chest tightened. I stood frozen behind the wall, listening to the wind push against the side of the house like it wanted in on the secret too. I waited for her to hang up, then walked slowly back to the table. Jenna came in moments later, smiled faintly, and sat down like nothing had happened. I smiled back, but only with my mouth. The next morning, I woke early and did something I hadn't done in years. I went up to the attic, the place where memories go to gather dust. Boxes labeled by season, holiday decorations, my old sewing machine, and a stack of Ed's files I hadn't touched since the fire. I opened the top box marked taxes and began flipping through folders. It was mostly old receipts, statements, bank records. But then I found it a thin manila envelope at the very bottom, unmarked. Inside, there were a few documents, folded neatly. One of them stopped my heart cold. Power of attorney. Edward Ellis. Dated the 11th of February 2016. Assigned to Jenna Ellis. Yenna. Not Daniel. Not me. I sat back hard, the wooden floor creaking beneath me. Why would Ed give power of attorney to his daughter-in-law? Why would he hide it? My hands trembled, but I kept going. Tucked behind the legal papers was a handwritten letter, no envelope, just one page. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Ed's. If something happens, Jenna, use this to protect the cabin. You know what we agreed. Daniel must never find out. Maggie, she doesn't need to know everything. It would destroy her. Keep it quiet. And thank you for everything. E. Nah. My stomach turned. My fingers gripped the page like it might disappear. The cabin, Noah's red house. The lake, the swing, it was real. Everything I thought was the innocent fantasy of a 6-year-old had been real all along. I folded the letter carefully, as if that might make it hurt less. But it didn't. The pain didn't come in a wave this time. It came like slow rain soaking through the roof. Quiet, but relentless. That afternoon, I drove. I didn't call anyone. I didn't pack a bag. I just grabbed my coat and left. My hands knew the wheel, even if my mind felt far away. It took an hour to get to the lake. I hadn't been there since Ed passed, or what I thought was his passing. The road was familiar, but the trees looked older, heavier. When I turned onto the gravel path, my heart nearly stopped. There it was, the cabin, red door, swing in the tree, a small wooden boat tipped on its side. I parked the car and sat for a long minute. Then I got out. I didn't walk to the door. I didn't knock. I just stood there. The wind picked up, sending leaves across the path like whispers. The air smelled like damp pine and unfinished stories. I don't know what I expected to feel. Rage? Betrayal? Relief? What I felt was clarity. Not everything, but just enough. Enough to know Ed hadn't died. Enough to know Jenna had helped him disappear. Enough to understand that my grief had been built on lies and my love, taken for granted by the people I trusted most. But also, enough to know this wasn't the end. It was the start of something else. Because once the truth touches you, even gently, you can never go back to pretending you didn't see it. You may grieve again, but you'll never be blind again. I didn't tell anyone I went to the cabin. I didn't scream. I didn't break down. I didn't even knock on the door. I just stood there, watching that red door like it might open on its own and confess everything. It didn't. So I turned around, got in the car, and drove home. But something in me had shifted. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was something calmer, like the moment after a storm, when the trees stop thrashing and the air feels clearer, colder, a kind of stillness that says, now you know. Now do something about it. That night, I made tea and pulled out my notebook. Not the recipe one, the brown leather-bound one I kept in the drawer beside my bed. The one I hadn't touched since Ed passed. I opened to a blank page and wrote, Margaret Ellis. Starting over. Underneath, I made a list. On. Call a lawyer. 2. Check all financial accounts. 3. Write a new will. 4. Look at rental listings. 5. Breathe. The next morning, I called Susan Levine, the lawyer, who helped me with Ed's estate 7 years ago. She remembered me. I didn't expect to hear from you again, she said kindly. Is everything all right? No, I said softly, but I'm going to make it that way. We met at her office that Friday. I brought the insurance papers, the power of attorney, and Ed's letter. She read them carefully, her brow tightening as she flipped each page. This is significant, she said. If what you're saying is true, There may be grounds to reopen your husband's case, and possibly more. I nodded. I don't want revenge, Susan. I want clarity, and I want protection. For myself. She looked at me for a long moment, then leaned in. Then let's start by taking your name off any joint accounts with Daniel. We'll go from there. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. That same weekend, I cleaned out the attic. Not out of grief, but purpose. I packed up old clothes, books, Ed's fishing gear, not to throw away, but to put in storage. I needed space. Real space. While I worked, I listened to music I hadn't heard in years. Aretha, Patsy Cline, old gospel hymns from my childhood. I sang along, softly at first, then louder. The house didn't echo back sadness this time. Just sound. Monday morning, I opened my laptop and typed short-term rentals for seniors. I clicked through listings, studio apartments near the lake, guest houses by the park, even a small cottage with a garden. I bookmarked 3. I wasn't running away. I was preparing a place to go. On my terms. When Thursday came again, I did cook dinner, but something simpler. No roast, no homemade biscuits, just soup and bread. Nourishing, but not indulgent. I didn't light candles. I didn't set the table with Ed's favorite dishes. When they arrived, I noticed things differently. Daniel didn't hug me. Jenna didn't take off her coat. Noah looked tired. I listened more than I spoke. I asked small questions, careful ones. I didn't confront. I watched, and I waited. When Jenna left the room to help Noah wash his hands, Daniel stayed behind in the kitchen. I reached into the drawer and handed him a manila envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "A change," I said gently. "I've taken my name off the joint accounts, and I've written a new will. You're not in it." "Well," his face flushed, confused. "Mum, what's going on?" "I don't need you to explain," I said. "I just need you to understand that I know." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "You and Jenna can keep your secrets," I added. "But I won't be a part of them." He looked at the envelope, then at me, like he didn't know who I was anymore. Maybe he didn't. Maybe I didn't either, not yet. But I was getting there. After they left, I didn't cry. I poured myself a glass of water, put on my slippers, and sat by the window. The porch light glowed. The hydrangeas across the street swayed gently in the wind. June's house. I thought about knocking. Instead, I picked up my notebook again and added 2 more things to the list. 6. Buy new bedsheets. 7. Visit the beach. Because why not? Because I've always loved the sound of waves. And I deserve to sleep in sheets I chose for myself, not the ones Ed picked out in 1998. That night, I fell asleep with the windows open and a clean pillow under my head. The air smelled like pine and night jasmine, and for the first time in months, I didn't dream about the past. I didn't dream at all, just rested. And in that rest, something inside me began to rebuild. Not loudly, not with declarations, just quietly, like spring under snow. I asked Daniel and Jenna to meet me on a Sunday afternoon. No Thursday dinner this time. No pretense. Just the 3 of us. I told them to come by at 2. I didn't explain why. I didn't need to. I spent the morning sweeping the porch, baking cornbread, not for them, but because I liked the way it made the house smell. I set out 3 chairs in the living room, not the kitchen. That room held too much history, too many Thursdays soaked in polite betrayal. At 1:57, their car pulled up. Daniel looked nervous when he walked in. Jenna was quieter than usual, her eyes scanning the room like it might tell her something I wouldn't. I offered them tea. They declined. Good. We sat. I didn't waste time. I know about the cabin, I said calmly. Daniel's head jerked slightly. Jenna sat back in her chair. I know about the insurance. The power of attorney. I've read Ed's letter. Silence. I looked at Daniel. I know you changed the beneficiary before the accident. I know he gave Jenna authority over things I had a right to know about. And I know he's not buried where we said goodbye. Daniel opened his mouth. But I raised my hand. Please, let me finish. He closed it. His eyes dropped to the floor. I'm not asking for explanations, I said, voice steady. And I'm not here to ask why. I turned to Jenna. I'm not interested in hearing what you thought you were protecting me from. I'm not a fragile woman. I've survived more than you know. She looked away. I took a breath. My hands were folded in my lap, firm. For 7 years, I grieved a man who was still breathing. I lit candles. I wrote him letters. I whispered his name into the night, like it could still reach him. My voice didn't crack. It wasn't time for tears. And all that time, the two of you, the people I trusted most, were holding pieces of a truth you decided I didn't deserve. Daniel finally spoke. Mum, it wasn't. I shook my head. No, this isn't about making me understand. This is about me understanding who I am now. I leaned forward, not threatening, just clear. I loved your father, even after all the flaws, all the distance, all the silences. I loved him as only a wife can, stubbornly, quietly, fully. I believed in the story we told about our life together. And I believed that when he died, at least the truth died with him. I paused. The room was so quiet, I could hear the tick of the old wall clock. But now I know the truth didn't die. It was just hidden, covered up by convenience, shame, maybe greed. I don't know. I don't care anymore. Jenna opened her mouth this time. We were told he had to disappear, that there were debts. I smiled faintly. You see, that's the thing. I didn't ask. She fell silent again. I'm not here to ask for apologies. I don't need them. What I needed was the dignity of truth, and now I've taken it back. I stood. They stayed seated, uncertain, small somehow. I've moved my accounts. I've updated my will. I've found a place of my own by the coast. I'll be moving in a few weeks. Daniel's face shifted. Mom, you're leaving? I'm not leaving, I said. I'm arriving. They didn't understand it. Maybe they never would. That was fine. You're still my son, Daniel. And Jenna, you're the mother of my grandson. I won't cut you out of my life. But the version of me that kept setting the table for ghosts, she's gone. I walked to the window, pulled the curtain aside, and let the light in. You don't owe me love. But you will respect my silence and my space. From now on, you come to me as I am, not as the woman you assumed would stay quiet forever. I turned around, looked at them, one last time. You're free to go. They stood slowly. Daniel looked like he wanted to hug me, but didn't. Jenna looked like she wanted to speak, but couldn't find words. They left quietly. No slamming doors, no tears, just the sound of shoes on wood, a door closing, and the soft hum of wind across the porch. I stood alone in my living room, arms loose at my sides. Then I sat, not out of exhaustion, but peace. Not the kind that comes from everything being okay, but the kind that arrives when you finally stop pretending. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I felt free, and for the first time in a very long time, I belonged to myself. I moved into the cottage on a rainy Thursday. It was small, just 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, and a porch that looked out over a narrow stretch of the coast. The sea wasn't dramatic here. No crashing waves, no tourists, just a soft breath of water coming and going, like someone sighing in their sleep. I unpacked, slowly, carefully, 1 box a day. I didn't want to rush this. For once, I wasn't in a hurry to fix anything. I wanted to feel every choice I made, where the coffee mugs went, which side the bed faced, whether to hang Ed's old photo or leave it in the drawer. I left it in the drawer. The first few nights were strange. Not lonely, exactly. Just quiet in a way I wasn't used to. I didn't hear footsteps upstairs. I didn't hear Daniel calling from the driveway. I didn't hear Jenna's voice pretending everything was fine. I heard birds in the morning. I heard wind through the trees. I heard my own breath as I fell asleep, steady, slow, mine. A week after the move, I bought a few pots and planted lavender, rosemary, and one stubborn tomato vine that reminded me of the summers when Ed and I tried to grow vegetables in the backyard. That vine never gave us a single ripe tomato. We used to joke it was more ornamental than edible. I planted one anyway. I also bought a set of watercolor paints. Nothing fancy, just a beginner's set from the art supply store in town. The woman behind the counter smiled at me kindly, like she'd seen other women my age try to find themselves in color. "Just play," she said. "Don't worry about the end." I painted wild shapes, messy flowers, crooked birds. Some days I hated them. Some days I framed one and hung it above the stove. Not because it was good, but because I made it. I started walking by the water every morning, just 20 minutes. Enough to feel my knees complain a little. Enough to feel the sun touch my skin. Sometimes I passed a man with a golden retriever who nodded at me but never spoke. I liked that. Just a small recognition, nothing more. One afternoon, I stopped by June's house before heading out of town. I brought her a loaf of sourdough from a bakery I'd found near the cottage. She hugged me tight and said, "You look different. Softer." I smiled. "I feel softer." She didn't ask for details. She didn't need to. That's the thing about women like us. We don't always need the whole story to understand what kind of chapter someone's in. Back at the cottage, I started writing again. Not long letters to Ed. Not journals full of pain. Just small observations. What the sky looked like at 6 a.m. How the lavender bent in the wind. What it felt like to wash dishes in silence and not feel invisible. One entry simply said, "I am not broken. I am just beginning again." I found joy in strange places, rearranging the bookshelf, organizing the spice rack, watching ants build trails on the porch railing. Things I used to rush past. Now, I watched. I noticed. I stayed. I even taught myself how to bake a lemon tart from scratch. It collapsed in the middle, but I ate the whole thing anyway, laughing between bites. I didn't post a photo. I didn't share it with anyone. It was mine. One day, Noah sent me a drawing in the mail. Crayon and marker. A big red house with a tree and a swing. He'd drawn me on the porch, smiling. In the corner, he'd written, "Grandma's new home." I pressed the paper to my heart and cried, not from sadness, from being seen. Because even children can tell when someone has found peace, or is at least trying. That night, I lit a candle on the windowsill, not for anyone else, but for myself. Just a soft flame flickering as the tide rolled in. The wind kissed the curtains, and the world reminded me, gently, that it kept going, and so did I. And I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living, not loudly, not perfectly, but fully. It had been just over 3 months since I moved to the coast when Daniel called. He didn't leave a voicemail. Just a missed call, followed by a short text. "Are you okay?" I stared at the message for a long time. I was okay. More than okay, actually. But that wasn't the kind of reply he was looking for. He wanted to know if I still burned with the fire I'd carried that afternoon in the living room. When I told them I knew everything. When I told them I was done waiting for love to come in the form of crumbs, I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I walked to the water. The tide was coming in slowly. A heron stood still in the reeds. The world, once again, was not asking me to perform, only to witness. I thought about Daniel's voice as a little boy, his tiny hands pulling at my sleeve when he was scared of thunderstorms. And I thought about how, as a man, he never once asked me what I wanted, only what I could give. Later that week, a letter arrived, handwritten, from Jenna. It wasn't long, just 2 pages. It didn't say, "I'm sorry," not directly, but it said, "I understand why you left." and it said, "We didn't handle it right." At the bottom, she wrote, "Noah misses you." Oh, that part broke something soft in me, because, despite everything, the boy had never been part of the lie. He only knew me as the woman who made chili with too much corn and let him eat marshmallows before dinner. I sat with that letter for hours before writing back. 1 page. "Tell Noah I'm planting a sunflower for him. It will bloom in July. If he ever wants to see it, he'll know where to find me." That was all. Not an invitation. Not forgiveness. Just a window open but with the screen still on. A few days later, I found Ed's photo while unpacking a box of old books. I held it in my hands, looked at the man who once held my waist like I was the only soft place he could land. The man who made promises he couldn't keep. The man who loved me in his own broken way, until he decided I didn't need the truth. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply put the photo in a drawer. Not because I hated him, not because I wanted to forget, but because he didn't belong on my wall anymore. Later that evening, I sat on my porch and painted. The sky turned orange and lavender. My brush made soft, slow strokes across the paper. I didn't care what it looked like. I just wanted the colors to live somewhere outside my head. And then, something unexpected happened. I saw a car pull up across the street. A familiar one. Daniel stepped out. He stood by the passenger side. And for a moment, I thought he was alone. But then the door opened, and Noah came running toward the garden. He stopped at the porch steps, panting slightly, his eyes bright. "Grandma," he said, "where's my sunflower?" I smiled. "In the back," I said. "Come on, let's go water it." He grabbed my hand without hesitation. Daniel stood at the sidewalk, watching. I looked at him for a moment, then nodded a small one. He didn't move to follow, and that was okay, because this wasn't about starting over with them. This was about continuing with myself. The morning I decided to burn the letters, the air was perfectly still. No breeze, no birdsong, just that rare coastal silence that feels like the world holding its breath. I took it as a sign. I had been thinking about it for weeks. The letters, the photos, the anniversary cards still tucked away in the box I never opened, but also never threw out. There was no anger left, only weight. And I was ready to stop carrying it. I pulled the box down from the closet shelf and placed it gently on the kitchen table. It was smaller than I remembered. Isn't it strange how grief always feels bigger than the things that hold it? I made a pot of tea, my hands steady. This wasn't a funeral. This was something else. Something more sacred. I opened the box and pulled out the first envelope. Ed's handwriting stared back at me. To Maggie, forever. It used to make me cry. Today, it just made me breathe a little deeper. One by one, I sorted through them. Not rereading, just recognizing. A map of our years together, in paper and ink, notes from anniversaries, postcards from road trips, a silly drawing he made of me once when we were stranded in the airport during a snowstorm. It looked nothing like me, but I kept it. And now, I was going to let it go. I walked out to the back porch with a metal tin I usually used for storing kindling. I placed it in the fire pit and sat down on the wooden bench Ed once built with Noah. It had weathered since then. The wood had splintered at the edges, but it still held me. I lit the first letter. The flame caught slowly, then flicked up with a quiet hiss. I dropped it into the tin, watching the words curl inward, ink turning to ash, then another, and another. The whole process took nearly an hour. I didn't rush. Each paper that burned felt like a layer peeling off my chest, not erasing what we had, but releasing the parts that didn't belong to my life anymore. I kept one photo. Just one. It was a picture of me and Daniel at the beach, back when he was maybe 10. I had my arm around him, and he had seaweed in his hair. We were both laughing. Ed had taken it. I framed it and placed it on the shelf, next to the small sunflower Noah planted during his last visit. Letting go doesn't mean erasing. It means choosing what you carry forward. After the last flame died, I poured water into the tin, watching the smoke rise and disappear. I stood there for a long while, the ashes cooling, the wind finally picking up, brushing against my cheek like someone saying, "Thank you." I didn't expect to feel lighter, but I did. Later that afternoon, I took out my journal and wrote, "Today I honored my grief, not by feeding it, but by setting it free. Love does not live in paper. It lives in the way I choose to live now." That night, I made a simple dinner, roasted vegetables, warm bread, a glass of red wine. I ate by the window, watching the sky turn the softest shade of lavender. The cottage didn't feel like a fresh start anymore. It just felt like mine. After the dishes were done, I took a slow walk to the shoreline. I didn't bring anything. Not my phone, not my keys, just me. The ocean was calm. The stars had started to show. I stood with my feet in the sand, the hem of my pants getting damp from the tide. I closed my eyes and whispered 3 words, not to Ed, not to Daniel, not to anyone in particular, just to the wind. I am free. Not because someone gave me permission, but because I finally gave it to myself. The cottage feels different now. Not newer, not busier, just settled, as if the walls have accepted me, as if the floors no longer expect another person's footsteps. I wake up early most mornings, even without an alarm. There's something about the rhythm of quiet that teaches your body when to rise and when to rest. I make my tea, open the curtains, and watch the sky shift from blue-grey to soft amber. I planted new things this month. Basil by the window, a second sunflower in the yard, and a cherry tomato vine that, unlike the one Ed and I once struggled with, is already showing signs of life. I water it with the kind of hope that no longer demands a result. Just the act of caring is enough. Noah visits every other Sunday now. He's taller, and his front teeth are coming in crooked, which he says he hates. I told him that crooked teeth build character, and he asked if that meant mine built 2 full novels. I laughed harder than I have in years. Daniel sometimes drives him down, but he doesn't stay. Not because I asked him to leave, but because I think he understands the space between us now. And for once, he respects it. He hands Noah his backpack, nods at me, and says, "Thanks, Mum." It's a new kind of thank you, not for favors, but maybe for the silence I chose instead of punishment. Jenna hasn't come yet. That's fine. Some bridges are not meant to be rebuilt, and some distances are a kind of mercy. I've started teaching a watercolor class at the community center. Just 5 other women, most of them around my age. We talk about blending color, but mostly we talk about life. They tell stories that sound eerily familiar. Husbands who left, children who disappeared, years that slipped by while they waited for someone else to choose them. I don't give advice, I just listen. And sometimes, at the end of class, I show them the painting I call Becoming. It's not a masterpiece, but it holds something I can't name, something soft and strong and fully mine. They always stop and stare at it longer than the others. Last week, I was walking by the beach when I saw a woman sitting alone on the sand. She looked about my age, grey hair pulled back in a bun, a scarf wrapped neatly around her shoulders, even though the sun was warm. I don't know why, but I sat beside her. We didn't speak for several minutes. Finally, she said, "I used to come here with my husband." I nodded. "I used to come here to remember mine. Now, I come here just for me." End quote. She smiled faintly. "That sounds nice." We didn't exchange names. We didn't need to. Some women speak the same language, even in silence. When I got home that evening, I took out the last box I hadn't opened. The one filled with old keys, small tokens, meaningless things that had once felt sacred. I emptied it all into a cloth bag and drove to the thrift store. Left it there. No ceremony, just a quiet goodbye. Later that night, I stood in the kitchen, barefoot. humming an old song I hadn't thought of in years. I couldn't remember the words, but it didn't matter. The melody was enough. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat at the table, and looked around. No framed wedding photo. No place set for anyone but me. Just light coming in through the windows, the smell of lavender from the pot on the sill, and the faint sound of waves in the distance. I felt full, not from the wine, from my life. For so many years, I measured my worth by who needed me. I gave and gave, believing that one day, all that sacrifice would mean something, that love would come back, clear and certain. But now I see, it wasn't about being needed. It was about being whole, and I am. Not because anyone apologized, not because the world fixed itself, but because I stopped waiting for someone else to hand me peace. I built it, one morning at a time, one truth at a time, one deep breath at a time. And as the wind moved gently through the trees outside my window, I whispered one last thing into the quiet room. Thank you, Margaret, for not giving up on me. I used to believe that if I just loved hard enough, waited long enough, gave enough, eventually someone would choose me the way I had chosen them. But life doesn't always give us what we deserve. Sometimes it gives us silence instead of answers, distance instead of closeness, and for a long time, I thought that meant I had failed. But I see now that my worth was never tied to who stayed, or who understood me, or who said thank you. It was tied to me, to the quiet, steady love I learned to give myself when everyone else stopped noticing, to the courage it took to step away, not to punish others but to protect my peace, to the truth that healing doesn't always come in loud moments. Sometimes it's just a soft breath in your own home, knowing you don't owe anyone your pain anymore. If you are a mother, a wife, or a woman who's given too much for too long, I want you to know you are allowed to rest, you are allowed to want more, and you are allowed to begin again, no matter how many years you've been quiet. Now, I want to ask you, have you ever loved someone so much that you forgot how to love yourself? If so, tell me below. What did it take for you to finally choose you? Or are you still learning how to do that? Your story matters here. And maybe sharing it is the first step to being seen again.